How's it going? And welcome to episode 188 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter and on the YouTube at On the Wire Pod. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me at 80 Grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin Hastings can be followed at Hastings Kevin. And once again, we are back for another week, Kevin, and we had a great show. We didn't have enough fun, apparently, talking about projections with Kyle Bland. We had to get right back into it because we have a new set of projections, as we tend to see right at the start of November every year or thereabouts. Steameer projections are out for the 2025 season. Just like Kyle's, we will see these change throughout the offseason, which is nice, and they will adapt based on signings and what have you. But before we get into all that, good to see you. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Adam. Thank you. Great to see you as well. Yeah, this is exciting. We talked to Kyle a couple of weeks ago, started diving into the PL Pro projections. I am a Masters Ball subscriber, so I have Todd Zola's projections that are out on November 1st every year, and now over the past day or so,
Nice.
Steameer projections are out. So we have some things to compare and contrast and find the outliers, and this is so much fun.
Yeah. And we got a nice little, for those watching us at home, or whether you're watching us live or watching the video version of the podcast on our YouTube channel, you'll see we got a new format here on screen. We're going to keep this little media screen up here and be able to toggle through some great graphs and actually give you a nice little preview of what it's like to be able to use all the PLV powered apps that Kyle Bland has put together. So if you're watching around at home and I haven't updated one of these screens, like right now I have Juan Soto's rolling Process Plus chart on here, just because that's literally the first one you see when you start opening one of these apps. Bear with me. This is the first time I've done this and try to do this in real time as we're talking to people. But hopefully, if you are watching this, you get a little bit more of a visualization about some of the players that we're talking about in real time. So without further ado, we have some players to talk about. We did mention we are going to dive into some of the broader strokes and things we noticed from these initial Steameer projections. But we also spent a whole episode last week, Kevin, just talking about news. You know what? We have plenty of news to actually talk about today. Some of it, a little bit more pressing than others. But we should touch on all of it. As you mentioned earlier, you're looking at ADP. So you're going to look at some ADP numbers later on as a reference point. You're using Draft Champions as your point, and there have been 11 completed drafts already that have to do with ADP from just the DCs, and then a handful of other NFBC 50s as well. I didn't know. Have any gladiators finished up yet?
Yeah, but they're not listed in ADP. There has been, I think there were a couple Tuesday evening. Adam, I tried to get in one last night and they didn't fill. I was, worse than money burning a hole in your pocket is if you finish third in a gladiator and you're awarded a free one. So it's sitting there. I have it. It's sitting there and it says just pick the
use it. All you gotta do is use it. Yeah.
So that is so much worse than money burning a hole in my pocket is a free draft sitting there in front of me. I tried last night. They didn't fill. We're recording this evening, but so I would guess Friday night gladiator for me as well.
All right, there we go. Nice.
There's some fab leagues in the lobby. The qualifiers for main events and OCs, and also some actual online championship drafts in the lobby. So there are fab leagues to be drafted right now.
That is interesting because usually we don't see any OCs start drafting until late December at the earliest.
I didn't look at the dates. I probably should have before I brought this up, but I can really quickly.
Well, I wonder,
yeah,
are they
awesome.
slow drafts or are they quick draft leagues? I don't have the draft open either, but if you have easier access to it, it's a nice little reference. Of course, anybody listening at home doesn't know what we're talking about. We're talking about the drafts you can join on the NFBC platform. I think the other platforms, ESPN, Yahoo, and all that stuff, and Fantrax open up their leagues a little bit later. Fantrax a little bit earlier, but definitely Yahoo won't switch over until, I don't know, like maybe early March, or
Yep.
maybe late
Slow
February.
drafts. There's a
Okay.
4-hour and a 2-hour RotoWire online championship available that will start when they fill.
I'd love to see that one get filled early and just to kind of compare and contrast by the time, all the fast drafts happen in March. Those are always
Yeah.
just fun to compare and contrast. But we have to still consider, if you are going to join one of those, a lot of this news that we're going to talk about may impact what you are deciding on when your time comes up on the clock. So let's get into this. We have a couple of catchers that I want to start off with here. Austin Hedges, he stays with the Cleveland Guardians on a 1-year contract. This comes at the right after announcing that David Fry will be missing the majority of the 2025 season after getting major elbow surgery. And so he'll be missing a good chunk of time before he can come back to DH, and then he may not even be able to come back to play the field at the earliest, maybe the start of the playoffs. So I mean, does this Austin Hedges, not exactly number one choice that you're considering probably in your drafts at the catcher position, but is this just Cleveland being Cleveland, keeping somebody on hand that can fill in the position when necessary, and does it do anything to kind of trickle down to other players that you're kind of hoping might get a little bit more playing time if Hedges wasn't brought back?
I don't think so. Bo Naylor caught in 115 games last season, and that's about the number I put it at. Austin Hedges was at 65. That's 180 games total, so about 20 games. One of them relieved the other one, whether it was pinch hitting late or for whatever reason. That's about what I would expect, and I wasn't planning on David Fry getting any time behind the plate anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think this affects much at all for me.
Yeah, I think if nothing else, it just kind of solidifies the same, status quo that we were seeing from last year going into 2025. And you're not going to see any ripple effects because there's a new catcher on the market that could have been an addition to Cleveland. And obviously this won't happen now. And that is Travis d'Arnaud. He was released or not. His option was not picked up by Atlanta. And so he becomes a free agent. Does his absence do enough to increase the value of Sean Murphy, or is there enough concern of previous injury and just wear and tear on Murphy, where you just assume they're either going to bring somebody in to lighten the load, where what they were doing with d'Arnaud, or is Murphy going to get that lion's share that we kind of expected to see from him ever since he moved into the Atlanta lineup?
Yeah, I think I know there was a really, really hot start to the 2023 season, so you might have to bring the counting stats down a little bit, but 438 plate appearances, 448 in 2021. That's skipping that 600 plate appearance season he had his final year in Oakland. I think those little over 400 plate appearance seasons, 17 home runs, 21 home runs, that's probably what we're looking at. The question is, are we looking at the 216 that he hit in 2021 and the 193 in 2024, or that 250-ish that we saw in 2022 and 2023 that makes him so much more valuable, especially in two catcher leagues? I feel like this was injury related all through 2024, all the way back to the injury in 2023. He was banged up on more than one occasion, multiple trips to the IL, and I don't know if I'm interested yet or not. Well, I'm not interested right now, but this is a player that could. I feel like he's going to be drafted earlier than I'd be willing to take the
Mm,
risk for a couple of months. But we get to spring training and he's healthy. I don't think his draft price will skyrocket. I think the people that are drafting him in that spot now are just already confident that he's going to be healthy and get over 400 plate appearances. But until I become confident in that, I'm not willing to pay the price he's at right now.
Sure.
And let me look really quickly since I do have it up here. Um, he's down here a ways, but he's still his minimum pick is inside the top 200. His average is about 248. But like we talked earlier, right after the season, it was probably 3 weeks ago. The World Series, the postseason was probably still going when we talked about this. Uh, there's 10 or 11 catchers that I really want two of in my two catcher leagues. I'm really going to try to get two of those 10 or 11. And he doesn't have the plate appearances to be in that group.
Mhm.
If we see him healthy in the spring, I might have more confidence that he could build on his plate appearance number, and maybe approach 500 plate appearances, which is what we were looking at with Tyler Stevenson for that
Sure.
conversation, who is in my group. And then Sean Murphy might sneak in there at the very end. But as of right now, I don't have much interest.
Yeah, I mean, I would talk. I remember was talking about Sean Murphy, especially last year, because they just weren't, sure exactly what Atlanta's plan for him was. You bring him over from Atlanta, you expect him to have the lion's share, but it was maybe at best a 60-40 split, as opposed to maybe like more of a 70-30 that you were hoping for. Yeah, perhaps there was injury related. Like Sean Murphy has, some history, some back issues when he was with Atlanta, with Oakland as well. So I never expected him to be a complete workhorse. Whether he played every third game or every other game or missed some time, and as you can see from the rolling chart, like there obviously was a decline in the second, in the last month of the season or so, where there was still quite a bit of time missed in between starts as well. But what doesn't seem to be it didn't seem to really affect the power that he brought in. He just wasn't making as good of contact, and obviously making some lesser decisions, probably trying to overcompensate for that lack of contact being made throughout the last month of the season. So hopefully that doesn't carry over into the spring, and we'll see what Atlanta ends up doing. I know I don't have his name up here at the moment, but I do know that they have a rookie catcher coming up that would kind of slot right into that backup role quite easily for Atlanta. So be something to
Yeah, and
monitor there.
Chadwick Trump got a little bit of playing time this year. He's
Plus,
actually gotten plate appearances. He's 29 years old, and he's gotten plate appearances over the past 5 seasons, just never more than about 50 in any one season. But he was getting a little bit of time late in the season, and I think that's probably who we see at least at the beginning. They do have another catcher coming that maybe actually be the one you're thinking of. Let me look really quick. I should have had this pulled up.
yeah, me too.
Yeah, Drake Baldwin. He's at the
Yep.
AFL right now, and people were talking about him last week when people were in Arizona. I heard people mention him a couple times. He's Atlanta's number 2 prospect, and he will be 24 years old this coming season. So we probably see him before too long as well. But I think so early in the year, I think we may see, if he's healthy, a larger share for Sean Murphy than we might once Baldwin comes up.
Yeah, but knowing his injury history, that might not be a good thing. Like we might see a lot of playing time for him early on, but if that wear and tear comes on quicker because of the added playing time, he could end up missing time, which actually might be a good thing. I'd rather him miss like 2 to 3 weeks straight than be cut out of playing time here or there, especially as a catcher you have in your starting lineup. So at least whoever you have as one of your two catchers is playing at
Yeah.
least every other day, if not twice every 3 days. So all right, that's enough catcher talk for the time. Sorry, Bubba. Go listen to
Oh,
Bubba if you want more catcher talk. Let's go. Let's hit on let's start with the pitcher here that you probably have less interest in now than you did even before. This is Kyle Hendricks. He is going to continue his career, which more power to him. I'm very happy for him to do that, but it will not be with the Cubs or anybody else. Well, it'll be with the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim as he signs a 1-year deal with the Angels. the Angels, already made that trade where they sent Griffin Canning to Atlanta, so there's an opening in the rotation. Obviously, you're not bringing in Hendricks to do anything except for start. Can he become of value to the Angels? Is this a 1-year deal where they're kind of crossing their fingers, hoping that he is going to be enough to trade at the deadline and they can get something for it? Doesn't not really at the Anaheim's MO usually, but I'm not seeing the real purpose of this deal on the surface. Is there something I'm missing?
No,
No.
I
Okay.
think you're exactly right, and this would be more along the lines of what Anaheim, kind of introduced. We saw other teams do it in 2024. Anaheim introduced us in 2023 to we know we're not going anywhere. Right before the end of August, we're cutting the guys that are on their final year of their deal and hope that someone picks them up to cover part of the salary owed to them for the remainder of the season. That's what I see happening with Kyle Hendricks.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm not even going to let this little load thing load up to find Kyle Hendricks' pitch type chart. You guys can do that on your own. We're going to move into some surgeries. We haven't quite hit the best shape of his life conversation yet. Instead, we're getting these surprise surgeries or announcements part of the offseason. And we've got two kind of decent ones. One, not as much of a surprise. You kind of knew something was going to happen, but I wasn't aware that Alex Bregman was going to have surgery until I saw the notification that he did. He had surgery to clean up a bone chip in his elbow, and agent Scott Boras said that he'll be fine in a few weeks. So take that with whatever size grain of salt that you need to. But is this enough of an announcement to hear that just kind of keeps you shy away from when a player of, whether it's Bregman or anybody else gets an announcement about surgery? And if you're drafting right now, or you'd be like, fine, they're just off my board, or is this a time to buy kind of low, assuming that you're trusting in the words of Scott Boras?
It's not as much that I'm trusting Scott Boras as I actually am happy when I hear of players I'm interested in having this type of procedures. This is a thing to clean things up and make things more comfortable. I don't see any setbacks from this. I think this can only be a good thing. I think it's really interesting that Bregman has been one of the most consistent players over the last handful of seasons, and I think um, I I really think the landing spot for him will matter. It's been we've heard so many people talk about over the years his pulling the ball right down the line, and the Crawford box is aiding him in his home run totals. But he's been so consistent, and I don't think it's going to cost him that much. Now, I wouldn't want to see him going to Baltimore with their left field out there. But most spots, I'm not too worried about that. And news like this actually this is a type of thing that probably was bothering him throughout the season, and to get it cleaned up is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, just the consistency of Bregman from year to year. And if you were watching, you saw that process plus chart on the screen just a little second ago. That he had a little bit of a slow part of the season, the start of the season, but really turned it up in the second half, especially those final 2 months of the season as well.
Yeah,
But
ended up with more home runs and almost 100 less plate appearances. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And then it all kind of came together there. And you can see on his player chart right here. Well, those who are watching can see it. Still ended up with 26 home runs, and a total of about a $160 runs and RBIs combined. That's nothing to be upset about. And especially where you need or don't need to draft him at this point in his career. I think is perfectly fine. Another somewhat of a surprise surgery. Not one that we're surprised that it needs to happen, but it came in at the very end of the season. Shohei Ohtani is having or had surgery to repair a labrum tear that he got in game 2. We all kind of saw that in game 2 where he slid into second and, held his arm, and everybody was afraid that he wasn't even going to play in game 3, but lo and behold, he was fine, or fine enough to play in the World Series. So go figure. But it still required surgery to repair that. He's expected to be ready by spring. Does this, though, do anything to deter you from picking? You've already chosen him first overall in a draft, from my understanding. He went first in our, PL mock draft that we did overall. And that's in a Yahoo style league where he's only the hitter. Does this news that he actually had that kind of a surgery and he'll be ready for spring, not like Bregman, where it'll be ready in a few weeks. Does it do anything to deter you from drafting him first overall?
I don't think so. Now there are instances, where I can see him not being the number one pick for some people. He has been so far in all but one draft. And Ronald Acuna Jr. went number one. Before the site turned over to 2025, he was still listed as number one from being last year's number one ADP. So I feel like somebody timed out. First pick of a draft timed out and was autoed Ronald Acuna Jr. But
Ouch.
I think for the most part, he's still going to go top 5. I mentioned when I drafted him, I considered taking Bobby Witt Jr. instead of him. Some of the projections I've looked at have Aaron Judge valued ahead of him.
Mm-hmm.
I can see him not being number one, but I don't see him falling out of the top 5.
I get it. He's coming back from the surgery, but just having the versatility. I know as a hitter, you're still at UT only, but that versatility of being able to get him in, when he is pitching, when he has bad matchups on the plate. I don't know if Ohtani has bad matchups when he's at the plate, but overall, that's and I can't help myself. I have to, just throw his process plus chart up here because why? Oh, where'd it go? Oh, of course, technical difficulties. And the first time I'm trying to do something like this, and we'll go ahead and throw that back up there. Come on, get up there. But that's just fun to look at. Look at it. It's just like a forest. It's a forest of green power. It doesn't matter if his decisions or his contacts are, MLB average based on process plus. The power just drives everything, where it needs to be. All right. Well, we have a few more news items to go to. Actually, just one news item. But I'm gonna take a pause right now. We'll take a quick break, and we'll get to that last item right after this. All right, Kevin. While Alex Bregman and Ohtani say they'll be fine by spring, we've got some official news that you've alluded to in the past that assuming this would be the case. But now Alex Anthopoulos of Atlanta has stated that he's not confident that both Spencer Strider and the aforementioned Ronald Acuna Jr. Will be ready for opening day of 2025. Like I said, you talked about this in previous episodes recently where it's, it may not be the case. He might push Strider, and I understand the logic for Strider besides health. But for Acuna, it's even more concerning. There's no reason to push him back for monetary reasons. He's all locked up. So does this do anything to deter you from going after either one of these guys at their current price point?
It does Acuna. I think Strider, most people drafting were already planning on him missing at least some of the time. Maybe not all the way to early June, but at least a few weeks early in the season. So I think most people are taking that into consideration. Acuna is a whole different story. His average draft position in the 11 draft champions leagues that have completed of 11. The 12th player off the board at 11.36. Okay. But when I remember I talked a couple weeks ago about you click on a player page, you can see where they've been drafted in drafts that aren't done yet.
Mhm.
In 9 of the 10 drafts since this news came out. And once again, earlier we were told maybe he should be ready for opening day, but we still might hold him back till early June. Now they're saying, yeah, we're going to hold him back, possibly as late as early June. So we're being told this isn't a maybe anymore. It's going to happen. 9 of the 10, he was drafted at 16 or later and into the mid 20s in some of those drafts. So people are taking notice.
Yeah, it make me want to grab that chart. You can obviously see the line going down.
Yeah,
And they've made that switch on this graph now. It does start in 2024. You can't go back to
it's
20.
nice there's still few enough though you can hover over each one and see where he was
Yep.
picked. Yeah, it's still nice.
And I
Yeah,
do
9
like
of the most recent 10 were 16 or later.
Yeah, the most recent one here coming earlier today. I like as you mentioned too, like they're showing it in real time on this graph now, as opposed to just
Mhm,
waiting for the drafts to be finished. So
right.
obviously, pick 27. That draft is not done yet. Assuming this is a slow DC draft, that would be my only request. If anybody's listening on this hover, if it shows you what kind of drafts this pick was made in, that would obviously
Even better, yeah.
context.
I
But
I think what I'm taking from this, though, is his average draft position is very quickly moving to where his maximum of
yes.
the drafts that have completed is.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the news is enough to, have impacted draft in real time. Cool. So, from with that, we have, as we kind of talked about earlier, we've got more projections to look at, as you mentioned with your Masters Ball projections that you can look at, and then we have the publicly facing Steamer projections, which everybody talks about this time of year because they are publicly facing. And they are easily accessible. Obviously, you can get them in a couple different places, most notably on the Fangraphs, both on their player pages and on the projection pages as well over there. So take a look at that. Make sure you're supporting Fangraphs as well with a membership. Every once in a while I will, like, for whatever reason my computer will forget that I should be logged in at all times to Fangraphs, and the ads will pop up and I'm like, what is this? And it's like, oh,
Yeah,
would you like to sign up for membership? No, I did this. Where are my cookies? I need to clear this up. And I log back in the site, just like, honestly, just like the picture list site. When you become a PL, just a member there, you get rid of all the ads, and it just makes for such a easier experience overall. Not to mention all the customization that you get, especially over
yep.
there at Fangraphs with that membership. So shout out over there if you're not already. I don't know what you're doing. Maybe you should probably change that. So overall, Kevin, you this is obviously you texted me and suggested that we talk about this. So obviously you've had some time to really dive into these projections. Overall thoughts and or observations on a grand scale here, that kind of stood out to you when you first started looking these over.
Well, one thing that I noticed, and this is typically the case, but it seems maybe a little more so, this year, and, when I took the Steamer, hitter projections and pitching projections and merge them into one list so that when I sort by dollar values, they're mixed together, the hitters and the pitchers. And the top 100 by the auction calculator using 2025 Steamer projections for a 15 team 5x5 roto league. Um, 23 pitchers are in the top 100 in projected dollar value earned for 2025. According to ADP at the moment in those 11 draft champions leagues, and the draft champions, yes, so pitching can be not taken as early as it is later in draft season. However, starters are not, but relievers are typically taking much earlier. We don't know who all 30 closers are right now. We probably won't know at the end of March either, but we'll know more than we know now.
Right.
is the simple reason that typically happens. But um, 42 pitchers are being drafted in the top 100. Only 23 are projected to be valued in the top 100. I find that intriguing. Now, as long as everybody continues to draft that way, we can't say we're automatically say we're waiting on pitching for this reason. Ariel Cohen brings this up quite often. You know, he is huge on drafting value. But if the rest of your league is pushing guys up, yes, you want to find the best value, as in the least bad value
Yeah.
is what you end up doing. But you have to play there, right? In a draft champions league, you're not I you would have to be very extremely lucky uh, to take late closers. It's possible. I know Rob DiPietro talks about that when he won the overall, he took late closers and hit like on 3 or 4 guys. It can happen, but it it takes a lot of things have to go right when that happens. So I'm very intrigued by the big discrepancy in where pitching is being drafted and where it's actually valued. And I was actually kind of surprised that there's not much pitching uh of value compared to the hitters, at least when we're talking top 100 players. Another thing, we talked about this, and we're probably even talking about the same player when we talked about this with Kyle. Kerry Carpenter. This I looked at for him specifically because I'm a big Kerry Carpenter fan, and Kyle's projections have him as the 15th overall hitter. I think that is awesome, and he's like the 200th player according to Steameer.
Yeah.
Well, if you look more closely, remember our first version of our PL Pro projections are 600 plate appearances. And you can look at Steamer 600 now. But I just went to the straight Steamer with the auction calculator that I use Steamer for 2025. And so he's projected for 500 plate appearances. And if you prorate that to 600, the projections are actually nearly identical. If you prorate his Steamer projections, it comes to 27 home runs. Kyle has him at 28, right? You prorate the runs and RBI, it comes to 80 or low 80s. I think Kyle has him at 85 and 86, right? They're very close. The batting average is only about 10 points apart. So playing time. And we talked about this, and this just drives that point home. My number one priority this offseason is trying to get as accurate a playing time predictions as I can, whether that's from other projections or like we talked last week, reading what beat reporters are telling us and listening to listening to the triple play fantasy guys, the fantasy beat, and trying to figure that out. But I don't think there's anything I'd rather know for any player than playing time.
Yeah, I mean, I finally found him. Like while you were talking, just trying to scroll through here. 136th bat based on Steamer projection value, based on those default rankings. You know, utilizing NFBC style format of a roster, $260 value, all that good stuff. 136th bat off the board based on those rankings with just 511 plate appearances is definitely something that you could very easily prorate based on whether or not you feel like he's going to be healthy enough to get even just that extra 90 plate appearances, like the Steamer 600 or like the PLV projections are already prorated to be. I don't know that brings them up to as high as Kyle has them at currently, from 136 all the way up to what was he on the? It was the 13th. 15. Yeah. That's a quite a leap for just an extra 90 plate appearances to put in there. But with that being said, he obviously has the hype and he has the talent to do so. Then it's nice to know, what not to know, but it's nice to assume that it was all injury and all that's completely behind him moving forward going into 2025. It's obviously an assumption you can't always make with every player that sustained any kind of an injury prior. So yeah, I mean the first point you mentioned, just the value of pitchers to hitters, is always interesting because you can always compare it to what we're actually seeing out in the market. And the market changes. The market changes throughout the year, especially as you get closer and closer to main event season. And we all talk about the trends that we see in that kind of a draft versus especially the DC drafts. Obviously, the format is completely different as well. Not being able to, really predict anything this time of year, especially when it comes to pitching. It's already unpredictable enough. And then to add in, an extra 4 months worth of waiting time is mind boggling sometimes. And then one other thing that you talked about right before we turned on was just the overall, the value of not only pitchers but the relievers that you're seeing kind of being ranked. One name specifically that stood out to you. I figured you want to bring that put a spotlight on that.
Yeah, most projections I've looked at have Emmanuel Clase as the top reliever or very close to it. Um, According to the auction calculator using Steamer projections, he would be the eighth closer. He is not going to be available where Steamer would draft
Yeah.
him. The 112th overall player, Emmanuel Clase. What may even be more intriguing is who is the number one closer. Have you looked yet, Adam?
Oh, I'm looking at it right now. It's up on the screen for anybody watching at home, so they're gonna know your answer. But go ahead and throw it out there.
Yeah,
It is interesting.
Mason Miller as the number one closer. I find that intriguing. I know Mason Miller. I've seen him as like the fourth or fifth closer off the board in a couple of drafts, so it's not shocking. Um, but then Edwin Diaz, Felix Bautista, kind of what we're used to seeing in most drafts so far. Josh Hader, only we're used to seeing Class A on top of these
Yep.
guys, not below them. But kind of the right order. Ryan Helsley, we don't know where he's landing yet. Ryan Walker, Andres Munoz. Those are all relievers that are ranked ahead of Emmanuel Clase according to Steamer when you run it through an auction calculator.
Well, what's interesting, this actually leads us into our next section, which we'll get to in a little bit. The idea that there are players out there that all of their value is really driven in one category. And is that enough sometimes to, justify jumping them up or taking a risk on maybe the rest of the categories that they add to are a little bit, maybe you get some luck and they overproduce in those other categories as well. Mason Miller, because he is the top, at least based on Steamer projections, he's the top reliever, is because he adds value in all four out of five categories. And you're not there, you're not running the risk of a blow up whip or blow up ratios in general. I think we draft, on the surface, we draft closers in drafts for one category. They have one job, right? Like you're just trying to get to that one category, the saves category, obviously. But you know what? 70 innings, 60 to 70 innings can impact your ratios dramatically in one extreme or the other extreme. So if you do have a reliever who's going to maybe get you 5 or 6 less saves than the guy on top, like maybe Class A still leads the league in saves with like 38, 40 saves. But if Miller can come in a close fifth or sixth in the American League with a low 30s saves, the difference in those ratios and not hurting you not hurt in actually being beneficial in strikeouts as well, more so than Class A, is that has to be taken into consideration. Obviously, that's what the Steamer projections are doing.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Yep.
and this is why we talk about relievers being useful in those ratio categories on a week if you're streaming, just to chip away at those ratios, because they can still put forth 3 to 4 innings in a good week. And if they can, if you can do that every week and get lucky and get good at it, you can obviously have there's actually value there rather than rolling the dice on a starter just to get those volume stats and then get blown up.
Here's the other thing. Here's the thing we just don't know about. And I've tried, and I've talked to other people, and they don't know either. But if we can come up with a way to actually project wins for relievers, that would be so huge. There are 121
Sure.
players projected to have at least one save by Steameer. 121. Every single one of them is projected for 3 or 4 wins. A couple of those players are going to have 10 wins. I don't know what it is yet. I haven't found anybody else that does either. But if we can ever figure that part out,
Yeah,
those are the guys moving straight to the top of the closer ranks.
there we go. Yeah, those guys that all of a sudden find themselves. Well, this won me a championship in my Dynasty head-to-head league, not this year, but the year prior. Craig Kimbrell ended up with like 3 wins in my championship week instead of saves, and I'm like, you know what? I'll take it. It won me the category. I didn't care. It was like, it's a head-to-head categories league, but it is interesting to kind of be able to, the idea of being able to predict the closers that are going to be put in those situations more often than others, or they're going to be coming in a tie game instead of a
That's
a two.
what I was.
Yeah.
Great point. That was what I was going to say. I think that is something organizationally, and maybe something to do with the specific managers as well. I think closers that pitch the top of the 9th inning in a tie game, we could realistically assume they'll have more wins.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is really the only way to take advantage of this.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Well, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other stuff to dive into with the Steamer projections. And we're going to get into one very specific one, the kind of the names that popped out to me, as I talked about earlier, that all of their value, or at least the majority of their value, is all tied up in one of their 5 categories. And we're going to talk about those players right after this break. All right. Thanks for bearing with me, everybody out there watching the video on YouTube that will not be edited. I'm going to just bring up some charts for the first hitter that we're going to talk about, and then I'm going to come back from that break. Berger's not a free agent, right? He's going to be in Miami again next year.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right, welcome back. You are still listening or watching On the Wire, episode 188. We were talking about Steamer projections and kind of some of those standouts. And one of the things that kind of stood out to me, Kevin, that I want to get your take on some of these players is just the overall value of players that really provide just provide a very specific job. We talked about just a second ago with closers, we draft them for one particular role, but obviously they can provide the elite ones can provide value in other areas. The players that stood out to me here in these Steamer projections are players that are, so my criteria here were that for hitters, they had to have had 500 plate appearances, and they had to have been ranked in the top 30 of their particular category for value in that category. And we're talking about normal 5x5 roto categories, runs, RBIs, et cetera, et cetera. And then of those top 30, which one had the lowest overall value in dollar value based on, the auction calculator, as you talked about earlier. First, we're going to start off here is already up on the screen. In RBIs, Jake Berger is the one that stood out the most with the low of the top 30 in RBIs. He had the lowest overall value of $12.40. This is based on a $260 budget. Go use the auction calculator and put in all the categories. These numbers may be different based on the settings of your leagues. I'll give you all that, the fine print there. So bear with me when I'm throwing out these numbers. But of that, $3.50, still top 30 in RBI. So I got Burger. I mean, Burger overall, obviously we see him with his power surges, and his power is very much on display here with his Process Plus chart. Actually, this is 2023's chart that's popped up on the screen, which is probably even more impressive than what we saw in 2024, because I have distinct memory of him trying to be traded to me in my home league, and I just couldn't pull the trigger to bring him on, and I was disappointed that I didn't after the final. But I mean,
Yeah, I
his
was gonna say this is gonna look like two separate
separate
charts, and it
people. Yep.
absolutely does. Yeah,
And so
that's
is
amazing.
is it's just, what it is. It's the mountain climber game on Price is Right. Exactly what it looks like.
Yes.
You just got to hit that bell before he falls off
I mean,
falls off the edge.
not it's not an exaggeration to say that the second half chart for Jake Berger is as impressive as Shohei Ohtani's.
Oh no,
That
it's
I don't
not.
think that's an
Absolutely.
exaggeration.
No, I mean, the only major difference based on just seeing this is his decision and his contact is much lower than
Right.
MLB average, where Otani's is right hovering around average, but the power is literally the same. And so that makes up for a lot of it, and then some. But when it's all said and done, he still ended the season, in the dark red in most of these categories that we're talking about. But you can see, obviously, those power categories, the home runs and the RBIs, is ultimately where most of his value did lie. So, with that being said, like Berger, you're not paying top dollar for Jake Berger. You're not picking him in the first like 9 or 10 rounds. Hopefully, you have ADP open so you can reference that for me. But does this value, those top 30 rankings in this one category, justify you grabbing him late in the draft to fill third base or fill corner infield, or fill any kind of starting position? Does this make him more of a target because he can provide that much value in at least one, if not two categories, to make him a target, and then not push up other third basemen earlier on in your draft?
Yeah, I already liked Jake Berger. What we're looking at here is leading me to like him anymore. That ADP you were talking about in the 11 draft champions leagues that have been completed so far, his average draft position is 125. So that's early in the ninth round of a 15-team league. And I be more than happy to grab him there. His minimum pick is 103, so late seventh round.
Okay.
But depending on how my draft is going and what other third basemen have been drafted to that point, I don't think I would have an issue if I thought I had to pull the trigger there. Um, it Here's guys going right after him: Alex Bregman, Matt Chapman, Josh Young going a little later. Uh, I I definitely like Jake Berger better than all of those guys, unless I know for certain Matt Chapman's going to steal bases again, which we don't, and I
Which we
kind
do
of
not.
doubt.
Yeah, sure.
But so yeah, I'm fine with Jake Berger here. So, and I like him better than the guys going after him. So then it becomes, Junior Caminero and Jordan Westberg, Mark Vientos are off the board. Then I'm going to have to jump here, I think. But I'm actually shocked that he made your your specs here, because to be top 30 in RBI and have 29 home runs with a 250 batting average. I understand the 0 and 1 stolen base guys are fewer and further between now, and he's still a 0 or 1 stolen base guy. So that has something to do with it. But to be the lowest overall value when you have a 250 batting average, 29 home runs, and his RBI, which are why he qualified for this, that is mind-boggling to me. Makes me think that one of the things that I have said for years that if I can only look at one thing, it's run scored because everything else affects that. But maybe we should be looking at RBI leaders because their overall value is great. If Jake Berger is the worst of the top 30
Yep.
RBI guys, give me all the RBI guys.
Well, what's funny is that the other two, the honorable mentions in this category, are also third basemen. Mark Vientos, you just mentioned him. Junior Caminero just mentioned him as well. And they're in the same exact boat. They're worth just a dollar. Vientos worth $1 more overall than Berger. Caminero worth. This is of course all based on Steamer projections. And Caminero about $3 more overall, but they both all three of them have less than a $4 value in RBI. So they're right in the same range in RBI, and they're all third basemen. So it makes me really want to dive into the availability of third basemen in general and whether or not I really even, if they're going back to back to back pretty much or close to it in a draft, am I not prioritizing third base at all at the top of my draft and just waiting until to fill that position with one of those guys later on, knowing that they're not, maybe that overall value isn't enormous, but at least it's really going to help push at least that one, if not two categories that they're going to, really kind of drive their value with.
I agree. There's something here to dive into, Adam, because Jose Ramirez, obviously first round pick, and fairly early. His ADP is less than 6, and he has been picked fourth. But then the number 2 third baseman off the board isn't being drafted till the end of the second round. There's 2 of them. That's Jazz and Rafael Devers. Then Austin Riley is right there near them. Early third. Those 3 are all less than 5 picks apart in average draft position. Chisholm, Devers, Riley at the 2-3 turn after Ramirez is being taken early in the first. Then there's a round to the end of the third before Manny Machado. And then we're looking at into the sixth, Royce Lewis. And then the Mark Vientos Jr. Caminero are only about 9 picks apart. You get down here, we said Berger at ADP of 125. After him, Bregman's not going to 155. So there's a lot of gaps in the third baseman, which tells me, yes, you're going to have a plan and what you want to do. But with these large gaps, it's going to mean paying very close attention and not forgetting and probably making a note right on your laptop when you're drafting. Don't forget to look at third baseman at these separate points of when you plan to, because it's there's several guys available, and it looks like there's probably some pockets of value here, but they're so spread out. And if you forget about 1 or 2 of these guys, you could be in trouble.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's stick in power here, Kevin. The name that stood out in home runs should not come as a huge surprise, I don't think. And again, top 30 in the category. So this player was, based on Steamer projections, would be valued as a top 30 producer in home runs. But comparatively to their overall dollar value, it makes up pretty much the entirety of his value. And this is Giancarlo Stanton at $3.50 in the home run department with an overall value of just $4.30. So obviously bringing a lot of negative value in other categories, including obviously stolen bases, runs scored, and just barely made my 500 plate appearance rule here with 514 projected plate appearances. For a variety of reasons, pretty much, DH only situation, all the injury history, and projected future injuries as well, no matter how much yoga he's doing. But he can still produce in that power category. Where is Stanton going currently, and is it worth taking that risk? He also obviously has the stigma of having the util only label, one of the few guys going into 2025 that is going to start and probably keep the entire season with that label. Is that reason enough to avoid, or is the power output possibility enough to at least keep him in consideration in your drafts?
I think he's in consideration because of how late he can go. His average draft position so far in the 11 draft champions leagues, 312, but there's such a wide gap. As high as 245, as late as 405. So yeah, at that point, Giancarlo Stanton, in a 12 team fab league, he's not being drafted in many of them. That is what this equates to. So he'll be out there and available. And yeah, the UT only makes it a little tougher, but the home runs, we've heard for the past 2 seasons, a lot of people keep talking about it's seems to be becoming more and more difficult to find power when we need it. There's some waiting for you at the end of a draft right there.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to is we talked about it all season last year, how difficult it was to stream power and to guess when the guys were going to break out, and also just the availability out there on the wire. It didn't exist. And I mean, his player page right here that I'm showing, it's a perfect example of where his value actually lies and where he can actually hurt you in other categories. So if this becomes a player that sits on your bench and he becomes your hitter, your power streamer that you couldn't find on the wire on a regular basis, then so be it. Obviously, you need to be able to manage how you're managing those 7 spots on your bench to the best way you can. He kind of crosses a lot of, he checks a lot of boxes for how you want to use your bench. Unfortunately, like usually you don't want, more than 1 or 2 stashes, which could include injuries. It could include rookies that haven't made their, or prospects that haven't made their way up. How many pitchers you want to hold versus how many hitters. And so Stanton is an injury risk. And he obviously, he playing time is not always going to be guaranteed as well in order to avoid the injuries. And so you got to be able to know how you want to manage a player like Stanton, or what ability you have to manage your roster, and whether or not Stanton fits into your overall scheme in just strategy in general. All right, let's stick in with the hitters. Let's move into some of those speed categories here, Kevin. The name that stood out to me in the runs, as I bring up my chart here, is Marcus. Marcus Semien, with a run value of 3.8, overall value $15 still. We saw him drop considerably in our PL mock draft. I would love to know, because I don't have ADP open at the moment, where he's going, especially in the realm of second baseman. But do you believe in the fact that not all of it, but a good chunk of his value is strictly just the fact that he is, at the top of that lineup? He's probably going to stay toward the top of that lineup. If he were to lose that spot and actually get knocked down, I don't know why the Rangers would actually do this to him, especially with the contract that he has and where he's been producing for the better part of it, the second half of his career. But is he the type of player where if he were to lose that, top of the order stability, would that just, would that tank his value completely?
I don't think it would tank it. He's still a solid player. Yes, the volume is what makes him as valuable as he is. But even just looking at the actual numbers Steamer has for 2025, number one, the plate appearances are coming down, and that's going to be a given because Steamer doesn't project anyone for over 150 games, and it takes over 150 games to get to those well over 700 plate
Sure.
appearances he's been getting over the past several years. Least amount of games he's played in a 162 game season since 2017 is 703. Crazy. So 695 plate appearances. Of course, the county stats come down a little bit, but not as much as you might think, only to 94 runs in the runs category, which is what we're talking about here. Amazing. One less RBI than he had in 2024, which some might not like to see that. 2024 was thought of as a bit of a disappointment for some. But his batting average bouncing back to above 250 and 25 home runs. I mean, 25 home runs, double digit stolen bases, over 90 runs scored with a batting average that doesn't hurt you, which is what he's projected to bounce back to, right near his career average of 255. He's the fourth second baseman off the board right now, but on average after pick 100, right? That it's like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, Adam. If you're not getting Marte or Albies,
Hmm.
and then Altuve is kind of the guy in the middle that's going about the between the third and fifth round, depending on which draft. His average is right at the end of the fourth. People are waiting until after pick 100 to take their shot on Marcus Semien. This is somebody that for the draft I did, and we talked about, I decided I was going to wait on second baseman and go for the runs scored and stolen bases from that position. But if Marcus Simeon's going to be available at his max of 147, that's 10th round of a 15-team league. I will be drafting Marcus Simeon if he's available. Excuse me, available in that spot.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we talked about this before. You just talked about it now. It's like if you're not getting one of those top two guys in your draft, are you just not drafting a second baseman? Do you just wait? Like you just
Yeah,
wait as long
that
as you
was my
humanly
plan
possibly
until
can.
I
Yeah,
see where he's being
yeah.
drafted. Now I'm like, ooh,
Well, I mean,
this
just based on you look at these the Steamer projections at second base, at least based on the second base eligibility that they have in here. There's only 11 guys that have double digit value. Bryson Stott being the final one here. Obviously, Simeon in that bit in that mix as well, but barely above Luis Rengifo, Luis Garcia Jr., Xander Bogaerts, etc. And so there's not a whole lot to really hang your hat on here. And so, but there is a nice, if I could steal the term from Paul Sports, like there's a glob of these
Mhm.
adequate second baseman that can put up, and you can kind of pick whichever guy is kind of still left over at the end of that run, whether that's at pick 100 or pick 150 for that matter.
Right.
Um,
So yeah, you're exactly right. Three second baseman qualified players in the top 100 of ADP, 11 in the next 100.
exactly. Sticking with runs as well, just looking at the category, you talked about this before, like the runs are what if you can only focus on one category, it's runs. And this was I had to look at this because it was crazy talking about RBIs and seeing like the guys, like the value that you see in that one category through like and then how it correlates with their overall value. Runs are so much higher. Like the overall value of the top 30 guys here. Like we're talking about Jake Berger in the RBI category had a, top 30 RBI value but he was the lowest guy at $12.04. And we're talking about Marcus Semien, who still is at the lowest in the runs category, a good $3 more than that in overall. So there's a lot more um, guys at the top of this list that are providing a much higher overall value for as players than in the power categories and the RBI categories. What I'm saying is we're going to get to stolen bases in a second, and this is going to completely revert what I'm saying. But the power categories in general, there seems to be more opportunities for players to be one-hit wonders in those categories, stolen bases notwithstanding. Is that kind of why you want to focus on runs scored more so than anything than power categories if you're looking at one individual stat of the 5x5?
No, I know that I know that it's backwards. I know it's the other way around. It's because hitting home runs scores runs, because
Sure.
stealing bases makes it easier to score runs, right? Every other category contributes to scoring runs in one way or another. So I understand that it's backwards, but every single year at the end of the season, I go to all of my leagues and I sort by run scored. And then you look over to the left at where teams finished, and it's the teams that score the
1 to
most
1. Yeah.
runs are the teams that finish at the tops of leagues, and that also goes for overalls on the NFBC. Some categories you look at, and the leaders in that category, there's not somebody in the top 300 of the overall towards the top of that list,
Mhm.
right? But runs scored, there's a whole lot of single digit numbers, right? They're finishing in the top 10 of the overall if they're leading in runs scored. So that it's simple. That's why I look at it. I
Yeah.
stumbled across that a few years ago. I've kept checking it every year and it's stayed true.
All right. We got a couple more players to talk about. We're going to go through every single category in a 5x5, but we're going to get to the next one right after this break. All right, Kevin, we'll jump right back into it. I alluded to it. We're going to get to stolen bases, the name on here. There's actually a couple names to talk about, and I'll throw out my honorable mention first because he didn't hit the plate appearance mark, so he doesn't qualify. But if it was a little bit lower, he would. It's your boy, Darren Blanco. He only is projected to be at 228 plate appearances, which is not a shocker based on what we've seen. We'll say it all. We'll say it again and again. He still can provide value even if he's not actually getting the plate appearances because of the type of role he does provide as a pinch runner late in games. And if he's pinch running, he's probably stealing as well. So obviously that's where his value is really tied to. But the name that does ring true here based on a 500 plate appearance minimum is Jose Caballero with a 5.9 value in stolen bases, but an overall value of negative $4.70. Obviously, everything else really dragging him down, but is like, are these rabbits still valuable because of how much value they can provide in this one category? And this is the epitome of that example.
Yeah, I think there's value with these guys. And there's a whole bunch of them that qualify at second base. We talked about this. Now, Caballero specifically doesn't have the batting average that some of the other stolen base second basemen have, unfortunately. But I I really think that it, there's a lot of them now. But there's a lot of guys stealing 30 bases and very few not stealing any at all. The 3 to 5, handful of stolen bases from a power hitter, that's not as valuable as it used to be. Now you want almost double digits from those guys. So if you're drafting guys like Aaron Judge rather than Bobby Witt Jr., you probably need more than one of these guys on your team. We're looking at 200 stolen bases now as a target for our season. We're looking at 13, 14 stolen bases average per team. So you get one guy, one Giancarlo Stanton in your lineup, and now you have to have a 30 stolen baseman
Sure.
if everybody else on your team is still hitting the average mark we want. So I think we have to have some of these guys. And 44 was a big number. It correlates really well to the 26 he had in far fewer plate appearances in 2023 when he was still in Seattle. It it would be nice if we'd get a little bit better batting average. I I don't think we will. Projections don't believe that either. They're projecting him right about the same batting average, but over 30 stolen bases. And the thing about Caballero, it's not zero power. He's projected for 8 home runs. He had 9 last year. The plate appearances Depending on what Tampa does, we know that Taylor Walls is there, and he was injured much of 2024. They like his defense. He's another guy that hits for even lower average, but can steal some bases. But the projection's only for 400 plate appearances. He had 483 in 2024. That's huge, right? This is what we got to find out. Now, is this one of those guys that we're happy if he's getting less at bats for that 223 batting average? Or do we need the 483 or over 500 so we can get to more like 50 runs and 50 RBI rather than he's only projected for 37 RBI. So there's give and take there with the plate appearances. Yeah, we won't, the batting average won't hurt us as much with less. Well, it can really hurt your counting stats other than the stolen bases that we're fairly certain we'll get from him.
So does a player like Caballero kind of fit better as a team streamer, like we talked about Stanton possibly fitting the bill in certain situations, or in order to get that 44 stolen bases, the 45 stolen bases out of him, do you need him to be in your lineup every day and then just take the hit in those other counting stats?
I think you have to account for it and try to pad those stats other places and leave him in there. We know what happens when we try to I mean there are players and for reasons throughout the season. We talk about it every week in season that will stream for stolen bases. I think somebody like Caballero is if you want the majority of 40 stolen bases, he's pretty much got to be in your lineup.
Yeah, and where are we drafting Caballero right now, Kevin? If you have that, like, where do you have to draft him if that's going to be
Another
part of
big
your
gap
plan?
guy that his ADP right now is 262. Um, a min of 146, a max of 326. So a huge discrepancy.
Sure.
I did draft him in the NFBC 50 that I did. That's a 12 teamer. And I got him at pick 312. So what's that, 26th round about? No, not quite that high. Uh, yeah, actually it is. Um, so I'm happy with him after pick 300. I don't think I'd be going inside the top 150 like some have.
Sure. And I mean, at that point, he can be a bench streamer for you. Like if you're picking him post
Right.
300, you can plan for that. And then,
And in an NFBC 50 or a draft champions, he's second base, third base, shortstop eligible.
oh, that's sure. And so that's going to obviously drive up in certain formats that'll obviously draft, that'll, especially in a best ball specifically, that will drive up his draft slot as well. All right, let's close out the hitters that kind of came to notice here. In the average batting average category, we have Masataka Yoshida with a value here at 3.7, but an overall value 3.5. So again, one of those guys that is really hurting you in other areas if he is in your lineup all the time. Batting average, such a hard thing to to value, and really requires obviously the volume to actually make an impact. And based on the projections here by Steameer, Yoshida at least in the top 30, and they're taking into account the impact of batting average based on how much playing time they're putting in. Nobody on this leaderboard would even comes close to that under 500. That's not true. Honorable mention goes to Jacob Wilson, who makes this list actually with a lower overall value than Yoshida, but only projected to be at 484. Plate appearances for Oakland, or sorry, for the Athletics. You're not allowed to call them Oakland. They actually put out a press release now. Officially, they are just referred to as the Athletics. The other part of the press release is so now we should be seeing a change on a lot of sites that instead of OAK, it'll be ATH. They do play in West Sacramento, which I actually knew that, not
Which
Sacramento.
I think it should be the Oakland Athletics of West Sacramento. Let's double up on the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim.
The Athletics won't do Oakland any favors. Like, they just won't. I just think that bridge is completely burnt down, which is extremely unfortunate. But I
And I
still,
am a nerd. I do like Sacramento Bees as well.
yeah, I would still love to see Tampa Bay end up playing in Oakland, just because they need a place that doesn't need a roof. And you really can't play in St. Petersburg without a roof. That would be unbearable most of the year.
Did you see that today, Adam, when Tampa was listed as the teams interested in Juan Soto, or that had made a call?
Yeah.
And sure enough, in the comments, it's like they don't even have a roof.
No, I wish I could give whoever the credit was. Somebody else had made a somebody else posted that Tampa Bay is reported to have very specific targets this offseason, and the best comment was that, yeah, a roof. It's just like, it's very succinct. It's all you needed to see. So hopefully they do figure that out. Again, I'd still love to see the Rays play in Oakland for half of the year. That'd be great. But talking about Yoshida, can you target, like, you don't I as a Red Sox fan, I don't know what Yoshida's role is going to be with this team going into 2025. I mean, obviously Tyler O'Neill is out of the picture. They have Ramon Anthony coming up that I'm expecting him to be up early in the season, if not by opening day. So there's a lot of outfield mouths to feed, even without O'Neill there. And it would be expected that Yoshida could fill in the DH gap most of the time. But at the same time, like, how much of that is guaranteed to be 6 out of 7 games a week, 7 out of 7 games a week, versus, and then if that playing time actually does deteriorate, that obviously brings down the one value proposition that Steameer says he has, and that is the batting average with the playing time. Should I, is this a buy low situation that I'm missing, or like, what's your thoughts on Yoshida?
It really depends on like you said, what's the role going to be, right? I remember prior to 2023, Tim McLeod told us he's going to give us a great batting average. He's going to score runs because he's going to hit at the top of the lineup, moderate power. That's exactly what we got. We got a 289 batting average, 15 home runs, and over 70 runs scored. He actually had over 70 RBI that season as well. 2024 cut way back, 108 games, so 32 less games, but 160 less plate appearances. Still got to 10 home runs, and we got that 280 batting average. So it's like we said early in the show. This is another perfect example. We need to know, right? And he's being drafted at almost pick 400 on average. So it is even in, this is like you like to talk about often, Adam, even in early fab drafts, this is a guy I would take late round, taking that shot on, is he going to hit higher in the lineup? Is he going to play more often? We don't know. If he's not, he was my 28th round pick, and I drop him. I think I think he fits that scenario perfectly in this situation because he's going so late.
Yeah, I mean, you can see watching at home, this process plus chart of Yoshida's 2024 season is a tale of two halves, like a
Like
couple
that
of
as
the
well.
players. That power alone, I mean, his contact was pretty even throughout the course of the year. Got it even better in the second half, but really it's the
Mhm.
power that came through along with the contact to kind of show, any injury, any lingering injuries that he was dealing with may have dissipated, or at least became a little bit more bearable in the second half as well. So if that can carry over and the Red Sox don't make any giant moves to kind of, to keep the playing time where it's projected to be, just go to roster resource. Yoshida is, batting fifth in that lineup as the everyday DH. But you bring in, a free agent outfielder who could also possibly be split some time at DH. Of course, there's rumors about every player on every team right now. But the newest one I saw was Teoscar Hernandez was being, it was being considered here by the Red Sox. And if they bring in a player like Hernandez, like that fits, that's literally the type of player that's going to eat up at the playing time of Yoshida in that DH role, or at least force him into playing some extra time in the outfield. So it'll be, I think that ADP is not really going to change a whole lot until until middle of spring training, at the kind of the earliest for Yoshida. And even then, it'll depend on what kind of production he's putting up and where he's batting in the lineup in spring training, as well as what his playing time is projected to be.
Yeah, I switched over to the pitcher list projections real quick because playing every day, hitting in the fifth spot, or mostly every day, hitting in the fifth spot of a Boston Red Sox lineup, that sounds a lot like 600 plate appearances to me.
Sure.
So I switched over to our 600 plate appearances. 16 home runs, over 70 RBI, over 70 runs scored, 273 batting average. When you're getting that at pick close to 400, you take that all day. Like I said, if he's not going to get the playing time to get us to 600, then he's a drop early in the year.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's finally get over to some of the pitchers, and we'll scan through these real quick, Kevin, because I just feel like the rankings of pitchers is so much more difficult than hitters, especially when it comes to these projections. Because the first name that pops up is kind of, I don't know, not mind-boggling, because he's not in anybody's top 10 anymore. I don't, not that I've seen, at least. And it is the wins category here, where all of his value, or a majority of his value, is being pushed into, is Zach Gallen, $2.9 dollars worth of value in the wins category, but an overall value of $4 and dime, so $4.10. Is this just like being on a good team, everything else kind of being questionable of whether or not you can trust him for ratios, not getting blown up, not providing the strikeout totals? What is it about Gallen that you think kind of the projections are kind of weighting most of his value in wins versus the other four categories?
Yeah, I want to give Ryan Bloomfield credit here because they talked about this on Bubba and the Bloom this week, and as Ryan was talking, what you just asked me about, I was just there nodding the whole time he was talking. I think this still goes back to uh, playing through injury, both last season and this season, and then the amount of innings that he put in, especially last season with that postseason run, and then coming back this year. So he still went out there, gave us volume, and because of the lineup around him, there's the wins that are still being projected. Rush ratios suffered a little bit, and strikeouts went down. Although Ryan did point out from about mid-August on, the strikeouts were really, really back for Zach Gallen. He was striking out 6, 7, 11 in a game or two for his last few starts of the season. So yeah, there may be some value here because I think he's going much later than we're used to seeing him. Yeah, he's outside the top 100 overall, Zach Gallen, right now. Now his min pick is 60, which is into fourth round, even though his average pick is eighth round. But if you're going to get Zach Gallen, and you wouldn't even have to take your first pitcher very early at all to have Zach Gallen as your SP2 and not have to make that pick till after pick 100. I could see that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if I'm going to value anything, I mean, chasing wins is difficult. You can't predict them all the time, but at the very least, what can correlate is obviously being on a good team. At the very
I'd be
least,
shocked if he doesn't get double digits, if he
exactly.
makes 27 starts or more,
Yeah.
right?
With Arizona, if they make any upgrades whatsoever to their bullpen, that wouldn't hurt. I'm not, I wouldn't say no to that. And that would obviously just solidify those projections for Gallen in the rest of that rotation as well. Yeah, I mean, and whether or not he's working through injury or not, that's actually, nice to see, because obviously that workhorse mentality is going to allow him to power through and push through and get through 5, 6, 7 innings on any given day and put himself in that position. Hence the projections for more wins as well. Strikeouts, sticking with the volume categories here. We got Hunter Green at the top of this leaderboard at $4.7 worth of value in the strikeouts, but overall value lower than that at 3.4. Hunter Green, obviously, playing for Cincinnati, wins aren't going to be the thing that you think of with any pitcher on the Reds in general. Playing in that ballpark isn't going to help the ratios in generally speaking. But is Hunter Green doing any favors to himself to kind of push past those projections, in your opinion? And are the strikeouts enough to kind of look the other way for the risks that you're taking in those ratios?
Yeah, not in every draft, but in some. It depends what other pitchers I've drafted. Because there were times Hunter Green looked like he could at some point be the best pitcher in baseball when we saw him pitch this season. Other times he can't find the strike zone. So, and then yeah, the nagging injuries we've seen, but the strikeouts are there. We wish he played his home games in a different ballpark. There's so many contradicting things to look at when it comes to Hunter Green. I think what's the most fascinating thing to me is his average draft position is sixth round of a 15-team league. 84 is his average draft position, 34th pitcher off the board. But when you go by Steamer projections, and many of the projections, as we've talked, will be similar on a lot of players. So regardless of how you do this, on my sheet where I merged pitchers and hitters, Hunter Green is the 280th overall player, that $3 plus that they haven't projected for. So it's going to be really hard for me to pull the trigger here, 200 picks ahead of where he's projected to earn. So I once again, we talked about it earlier, different players of different positions mean you have to adjust, and you can't just go strictly by dollar values. However, 200 pick difference is going to be hard to make up, no matter how great. I had Hunter Green on some teams this season and loved watching him pitch. I think I may love watching him pitch in 2025 without him actually being on
Be
any
on
of
your
my
team.
fantasy
Yeah,
teams.
sure.
This is the way it's looking.
I mean, this is a classic example of like whether you're paying for what you saw or paying for what you are going to see. You can see from the player page that's up on the screen now, it's like he's projected to have this negative value in all these ratios, but finished the season at 150 in the third innings, 2.75 ERA and a 1.02 WHIP. Like this, I mean, this is, Cy Young type numbers that you're throwing out there, in addition to the 27%, 28% K rate to go along with that. So, like, it's just the fact that we're not, obviously, Steamer at the very least is not expecting that to repeat itself based on the underlying numbers, the 9.3 walk rate. Even PLV doesn't love Hunter Green with he finished the season with a 5.1 PLV, which was below average in Major League Baseball. So it's just a matter of, are you willing to pay the price of the things he's done, hoping he can repeat, or are you going to trust the underlying metrics to kind of force his hand? He's going to have to make some adjustments, and if he wants to repeat, and if he doesn't make those adjustments, it's more likely that he doesn't come close to what he finished 2024 in.
I got a question for you, Adam. Hunter Green, or a full round later in a 15-team league, Spencer Strider?
I mean, it's got to depend on how, the first couple rounds have gone, where like, is this my first pitcher? If this is my
Right.
first pitcher, probably
Do you
not.
need a guy on opening
Yeah,
day? Right?
yeah,
You still
exactly.
need that guy?
If this is my SP, even my SP 2 or 3, I'm probably at a
I would say
point.
2/3. Yeah.
Yeah, then I'm probably okay grabbing Strider and putting him on my bench for the first, 2 months, hopefully not much more than that, and getting the production that I would expect out of him for the final 3-4 months of the season being greater, and plus the replacement pitcher that would be in my rotation for the first 2 months, plus Strider giving me the last 4 months. I think that I feel more comfortable with that, especially since I'm going to do most of my streaming in the first 2 months of the season. In that, the production and the opportunity I'm going to have to kind of stream that spot in my rotation in April and May. Very, hopefully if I do it right, or if I have enough, the, confidence in that with that league and the way I'm managing it. I think that would end up being a higher value in less risk than a Hunter Green being on my team all season long, because you're not drafting Hunter Green expecting to drop him unless he completely blows up. And I think that there's enough risk there where it's just not worth it. I don't know. Where do you fall there?
I lean Strider because I would anticipate probably not many more innings for Hunter Green.
Hmm.
Um,
Sure.
the 150 we saw in 2024 is the most we've seen from him. And I think that's about what we'll see. Now, it's interesting to me that he's so far down the Steamer ranks compared to ADP when Steamer's given him 189 innings. Um, uh, it's it's the ERA they have ballooning. Everything else looks great. Well over 200 strikeouts, double-digit wins with those extra starts. The projections look great except for ERA. Maybe scroll down and whip a 1.25 whip. So they are not buying the 2.75 ERA and 1.02 whip. They are making both of those very elite numbers well below league average.
Hmm.
So that's why he dropped so far down compared to ADP on the rankings. But the double digit wins and 220 some strikeouts, if you think Steamer's projections are off on these ratio categories, you're probably in on Hunter Green, at least closer to being in than it seems like I am. But once again, I don't know if I believe in 40 more innings and 6 more starts for Hunter Green in 2025. And if I don't, he's not going to have that many more innings than Strider anyway. So
Right.
I agree. I'm on Strider.
All right. Well, let's get into the ratios real quick as well. This one's interesting only because he doesn't have a team at the moment. And in the ERA category, the one that stood out was Max Fried with a 2.4 value in ERA, with overall value of just 7.8. To kind of put that in perspective, the guy with there we go. The guy with the best value in ERA is Paul Skeens at 9.8. And of course, he has an overall value of 34. And so to see Max Fried still with, a good chunk of it, much more of a higher percentage of his value coming from his ERA in the innings that he can provide, projected to be at 170 innings on the season, one of the higher ones on this list of players, um, is obviously, in order to provide value in the ratios to the extreme that we're talking about here, you have to have the volume to back it up. But is that volume not coming with enough on the counting side to be interested in what he can do with ERA, or is this one hit wonder? Because he's not helping you in WHIP either, at least based on the projections. Negative value there as well. at least comparatively so to other aces or ace-like pitchers. Where are you on Max Fried, and do you buy this kind of one-hit wonder projection that we're seeing out of Steamer?
Uh, I I I don't know. I I I have a hard time with this because Max Fried has been, even when he's been in and out of the rotation a little bit due to injury, he's just always so solid. Um, and projected for a 3.39 ERA um, by PLV. And then and I was looking at his Steamer projections really quickly. 3.38, 1/100th off
Yeah,
in projections for ERA there. Giving him 29 starts, 170 innings. He only had about 150 Ks, so they're projecting him for 140 some. I mean, that's just solid where he's being drafted. I think, and it's I was just gonna say, and then I look and his name's right next to him in ADP. This is similar to Zach Gallen. When we're getting these guys in the 8th round of a 15-team league as an SP2, sign me up.
there you go. Yeah, it's just interesting to see how the projection, especially Steamer here, is like tags the guy that you feel is so reliable, and I think most of us would feel the same way about Max Fried in general. Never really standing out in anything, but not really hurting you anywhere. Right, very much so reliable. I think it will depend on a lot of the like this little ranking that I put together may change drastically based on where he ends up pitching next year as well.
Mhm.
Based, obviously on the ballpark, on the team construct, and et cetera, et cetera. You very well could bring his, value up in wins if he ends up signing back with Atlanta or with a winning ball club. And that could kind of start evening things out a little bit more than what we have here, utilizing what I assume is a Major League Baseball average when it comes to predicting, wins and other aspects of these projections. So something to kind of see how that flows out as well. All right, so we have two more categories here, Kevin. Yeah, we got whip, and of course the favorite saves we'll close out with at the end. We'll get to both of those right after this final break. All right, thanks for bearing with us here on the wire. We've got two more categories for one-hit wonders based on the Steamer projections here. I'm gonna go with the other ratio category here, Kevin, with the whip category. The one that I'm gonna get the honorable mentions out of the way because I can't in good conscience call them out because obviously they're both not coming back from injury and or may not probably won't start the opening day roster. That Spencer Strider and Brandon Woodruff are both would both fit the bill here based on the projections. But the one that stood out that would have an innings minimum, if you will. I obviously am not. I'm also filtering out all the relievers in these first four categories. We'll stick all the relievers in the saves category. But in whip, the one that stands out the most is Garrett Cole with a 1.9 value in whip. Overall value still 13.7. That 13.7 really kind of in the middle or slightly below the middle of these top 30 guys in the category though. And so with we're talking Jacob DeGrom, Tarek Skubal, Chris Sale being the guys that are above $30, Paul Skeens of course as well. Overall in this, if I'm looking at this top 30 in the whip category, Garrett Cole right in the middle of the whip value, like the top 30 in whip, but lower than that in the overall dollars. So obviously that percentage of his value coming from this one category. Of course, Garrett Cole gives you strikeouts. Of course, he's playing on the Yankees. He's going to still provide you with wins. But these projections having him hurt you in ERA is enough to kind of like show that category, that whip category, is that much stronger than the other ratio. Is this what kind of concern do you have about Garrett Cole being an ace or not being an ace because he actually is hurting you in a particular category compared to the other, your other SP1s? You want to draft an SP1 that's not going to hurt you anywhere.
Yeah, I don't feel like Garrett Cole is going to hurt me anywhere. Part of the projection, I think I'd give him a couple more wins. Um, and we do know the strikeout rate is down quite a bit. And so, if we're looking at 160 170 strikeouts rather than the 200 we're used to with Garrett Cole, that's my biggest concern. I'm not concerned about the ratios or the wins. Obviously whip is the category that he's ranked highly in, and then overall lower. But Kyle's got him for a 3.49 ERA here, double digit wins. I like I said, I would probably add a couple to his win total. They're giving him 29 starts. That's probably about right. That's two really short or one, moderate IL stint there. So I think Garrett Cole is fine and might be being slightly underdrafted. And I never thought I would say that. But he, going early fifth round overall, 22nd pitcher off the board. There's 5 or 6 relievers there. I guess the best way to look at this is look at the starters going ahead of him. And the ones immediately ahead of him, 3 of the 4 are relievers. But Garrett Crochet, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Blake Snell, right? So it it fits, right? All of these guys have questions, but can be absolutely amazing. So gosh, I when I'm looking at these, I try to think about, if I'm in a draft, what do I do? I think as long as I can get him in the 3rd round, I am all in on Jacob deGrom. Now, in some drafts, he's going in the 2nd round. I'm not so sure about that, mainly because I don't want to draft any pitcher in the 2nd round. So if I draft a Jacob deGrom, um, Garrett Cole is pretty safe, right? I might be scrambling for strikeouts at some point, but as a backup, a safe play for my SP2, I'd be happy with Garrett Cole there. Now, if I haven't drafted a pitcher yet, do I want Garrett Cole as my SP1? Probably not. So that's the difference because the strikeouts are down. So, like we talked earlier, it depends on what I've done with the position earlier in the draft, even though we're talking early in the draft.
I think it also is got to depend on how much you believe the projections when it comes to these ratios in general.
Mm.
Not only in playing time, obviously, going the innings pitch is going to impact how important these ratios actually are to your teams. Obviously, more innings, the more of an impact they have, just like batting average does on the hitter side. But I mean, if you look at the top 30 pitchers based on dollar value from these Steamer projections, Garrett Cole is he's of these top 30 in overall value. He's the only starter to provide a drastically negative value in ERA in comparison to everybody else. The only other starters on this top 30 list that provide any kind of a negative value in ERA based on the projections solely are Joe Ryan, Pablo Lopez, and Shota Imanaga. And those guys are just barely under 0. Everybody else has a positive number in that category, as opposed to Garrett Cole, who's the lowest of all the starters at negative $2.03. You put that in perspective how you want as you look through this auction calculator on your own. Whereas everybody else in the top, and this is where I'm saying, like, I don't want, if I believe these projections, I'm not drafting Garrett Cole definitely not as my SP1, and probably not close to where he's being drafted in general, because I don't want my top 1 or 2 pitchers to be hurting me anywhere. And if I rely on these projections to do my drafting, I'm not touching Garrett Cole, because he's literally going to give me the least opportunity to win this category compared to all the other pitchers that I can be drafting in this area who aren't going to hurt me anywhere. Again, caveat, if I'm going solely based on these projections, and that's how much, I'm putting as much stock into them as possible.
How much of an ERA improvement over the 3.78 Steamer has would you need?
Without seeing the numbers in front of me, what goes into these? All right, well, let's just put it this way: what is the projection for, say, Otani? What is Otani's ERA projection? Because he has his ERA value is just slightly positive overall, um, and that's what I would want to see. I would want to see this ERA value to be a positive comparatively to other starting pitchers that are available.
Gotcha. All of a sudden, my page is loading
Yeah.
slow, but I'm looking for you. Because the reason I asked, 3.78 is what Steamer has.
Mhm.
Um, PLV projections that Kyle put out a couple weeks ago now is a 3.49, and that's what I was looking at. So I was having a hard time um, comprehending that Garrett Cole had a negative ERA number when I was looking at Kyle's 3.49. Well,
Sure.
3.78 doesn't seem that bad to me either. So
No, in the grand
yes,
scheme of things, a 3.78 is not bad, but from my
well,
ace,
that's not your
it's not
ace,
great.
right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, so if you could bring that closer to what Kyle's got projected, then this changes. Obviously, these are all projection based as well.
Shohei Otani is projected by Steamer for a
Yeah,
3.49
and there we go.
ERA.
There we go.
So
All right.
there's the number we want.
So it really depends on, do you believe Kyle or do you believe Steamer, and then that's where you're gonna base all of your decisions on. All right, let's close it out here, Kevin. In the reliever category of saves, the one that you guessed as I was looking up all these players pretty quickly, that it was going to be Alexis Diaz, with a value in the saves category of 5.9 compared to an overall value of negative 0.6. We already talked about Hunter Green in the form of Cincinnati, and I will give a shout out, of course, to Uncle Ted, who brought this up in the chat. Does Terry Francona being the manager here make any kind of an impact on any aspect of the Reds? Never mind specifically the bullpen and what decisions are made about Alexis Diaz. We had so many people, shout out, of course, to Rick and Jake over on In the Pen, calling for Diaz to be pulled from that role the same way that the Pirates finally did with David Bednar at the end of the season. That never happened. The Reds never ended up making that decision. They let him just keep going out there and ballooning his ERA. And you know what? Still getting the saves. So you got what you paid for, at least what you were hoping to pay for. It just came with a little bit of baggage on top of that. Do you expect him to lose his job if he does the same thing, which would not give him the opportunity to get these saves that is driving all of his value?
Yeah, it's a definite possibility. I didn't have much interest in Diaz coming into draft season. I know some people don't think it's draft season yet, but drafts are happening. Some are done. And yeah, that I think that's a great point. We just don't know, because you know I feel like Terry Francona has been the type of manager that does like to have a steady ninth inning guy, but he doesn't seem like the guy, like, to me, that's going to throw somebody out there with a ERA over 5 either. So I think that there may be some value in trying to speculate on a different Cincinnati Reds closer. I think that's a great point.
I mean, to be fair, Francona, how many years does he actually have managing where he didn't have a well-paid or established closer at his
Not
disposal
many.
coming in? I mean, we came into Boston. Boston also signed Keith Folk in that first year for a long-term deal, so he was set in that
Yeah.
role. Obviously, most recently being in Cleveland, he had the obvious guy that nothing was going to happen to Class A in that role, and so this might be
And they
uncharted territory for Francona.
and it wasn't that was the Corey Kluber trade. They traded Corey Kluber when he was
For
still performing very, very well for Emmanuel Clase.
mhm.
If he had anything to say about that, then he also likes nice young closers to come in and take over a role, right?
I mean, Diaz is not exactly old, but at the same
Right.
time, he's still under 30. As his player page reminds me, is 28. He just turned 28 2 months ago, and so I mean, there can very well be a young arm coming up in Cincinnati that could take this over, especially if Diaz does anything close to what he did last year in those underlining metrics. All right, well, Kevin, those are the names that stood out to me in that realm. We could spend multiple weeks diving into very specific areas, but I think what came out of that was great in the fact that we were able to like really dive into different positions, really dive into just like where people are drafting and kind of like shed some light onto the decision making that goes into drafting. But end us here with any other experience from the drafts that you've done or any other tidbits of information that I think would be useful.
No, I think this is great, and fortunately, I find it an absolute blast because we're barely scratching the surface, right? This is the type of thing we're gonna continue to talk about on many episodes through the off season. We're gonna have more projections. We're gonna have more ADP. It's just gonna continue. And I echoing something I think I've brought up the past 2 or 3 weeks. Um, I have always said be careful about cherry picking from the projection system that agrees with your opinion. At the same time, when there are large discrepancies, that's where the spot is to go make the deep dive, right? Why does this system like this player so much better than the others? Is it just playing time? If it's playing time and you agree with it, you are in on that player. That's not cherry picking, in my opinion, right? So that's the type of thing to continue to look at, and hopefully you find this as fun as I do because this is what we're going to be doing for the next 4 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you can see on the screen as well, you can pick and choose the projections you want. Still, right in the front and center on the PL
Yep.
on picture list is Kyle's 2025 PLV projections. Version 1, obviously based on
I would guess we'll get a version 2 before too long, too.
yeah, especially with all the other projections starting to trickle their
Mhm.
way out. You got to keep on your toes, and that's why you do it. So make sure you're checking that out. Everything that's over there at pitcherlist.com. And if you're not already, this is the perfect time to sign up for PL Pro because especially if you sign up for a year long, you're gonna get all the good stuff throughout between now and the end of next season as well. So keep an eye out for everything to come there and everything else that we have going on through. And I'm really just trying to stall, Kevin, because we're at the 1 hour and 53 mark. I'm trying to get to that 2 hours. I don't think I can stall for another 7 minutes. So I'm just gonna call it here. Thank you guys so much for listening. This has been episode 188 of On the Wire. On behalf of Kevin Hastings, I am Adam Howe. Thanks for listening. We bid you goodbye.